The following transmission contains unencrypted instances of explicit language.
Shall we begin?
Smiley is suspicious, Percy.
You won't know who to trust. Let's begin.
Welcome back, fellow Spy Nerds, to the Spies Like Us podcast. That is, of course, the podcast where we discuss the representation of tradecraft on screens large and small. With me, as always, is my trusty buddy, Fred Kennedy. Say hi to the nerds, Fred.
Hi, nerds. Glad to be with you. We're going to be talking about the movie Official Secrets. And it's about a woman who works for British security. And she stumbles upon a memo that is kind of secret, but it's very disturbing to her.
Official Secrets is a 2019 British offering. It dramatizes real-life events from 2003 based on a non-fiction book from 2008 called The Spy Who Tried to Stop War. This is much like our recent episode on the torture report. This is more a story about a whistleblower within the intelligence community than it is about intelligence operations per se. The intelligence operation at the heart of the matter involve attempts to manipulate the United Nations Security Council into voting the way the Bush administration wanted them to, leading up to the second time that we invaded Iraq. Featured agencies are the British GCHQ and the American National Security Agency. We've talked a lot about the NSA has featured in a lot of our films up till now. I think this is the first appearance of the GCHQ for us. So
Who she works for.
That's who our main character works for. That's right. So let's see what we were able to dig up about them. They, like so many other intelligence agencies in the Western world, has its roots from the World War period. This started up right after World War I, when the government decided that a peacetime cipher and code-breaking agency was needed. Very famous Alan Turing was a senior staff member of the original agency. It has repeatedly expanded its scope during World War II, again during the Cold War, and nowadays under the War on Terror. Currently tasked with SIGINT, that again is the monitoring of signals, radio waves, electronic communications, intelligence, and information assurance. We have discussed SIGINT previously. Information assurance is the methodology of storing and sending information to the right people at the right time while preventing interception. They answer to the Foreign Secretary, just as MI6 does, but GCHQ is not part of the Foreign Office. The Foreign Secretary is described by Wiki as being the fourth most important permanent secretary. And it's interesting to note that Britain keeps these two agencies separate from, kind of compartmentalized from each other, where it seems to me that the NSA and CIA kind of work a little bit more hand in hand. MI6 is a little bit involved in the movie, as is Special Branch. Special Branch, again, being the division of Scotland Yard that assists British intelligence with domestic things. They're like, I don't know, the part of the police that helps the spies catch other spies if they need to.
Yeah, George Smiley in the Jean Le Carré early books has a friend, a contact in Special Branch that he goes to for help. I think it's in either or both A Call for the Dead or A Murder of Quality. But he has a guy he goes to in Special Branch for when they need police type of work.
Right. Yeah, Special Branch was the agency involved in the very first movie we ever did on this podcast, which was, The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 1934 version. So yeah, again, as to the matter of realism, again, this is based on a nonfiction book. As far as I can tell, all the principal characters in the movie are based on and named correctly after real people. They're not using pseudonyms or changing the names around. A notable exception here, possibly, is Frank Koza, who's the author. His name is on the memo that the movie is all about. And we know that a man answered the phone at the NSA answering to that name, but we still actually don't know who he is, which is quite interesting.
I don't think we ever meet him, do we?
We do not meet him, and we like literally we do not know who he is. I'll tell you an interesting story that Martin Freeman, who's a character in this story, told. At one time, they were doing a presentation, like a Q&A about the movie, and a man, let's see, I don't know, there was a man in the audience who said, who suggested like that Frank Koza might be hiding in plain sight, and then stood up and walked out of the Q&A. Kind of weird.
Yeah.
We've got Keira Knightley at the helm of this one. Most famous, at least to me and my generation, and possibly my nationality, for playing Elizabeth Swann in the Pirates movies. I'm a big fan of those. I like her in them. She mostly does period pieces in her career following Pirates, which are really not my kind of thing, so I don't see much of her in those kind of things. Nice to see her outside of a Pirates movie for sure. I always hear good things. I hear, she's like a good actor. She pulls it off in this one for me for certain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Matt Smith is in this movie too. He was the 11th Doctor Who. Are you a Doctor Who fan?
No, my son is, but he is huge right now because he plays Daemon Targaryen in House of Dragons, which is the prequel to Game of Thrones. So he is huge right now.
Right. Okay. Good. He was a fun doctor, and I like him a lot in this movie.
Yeah.
Interestingly, too, did you ever watch the newest Sherlock Holmes TV show with?
Yeah.
Okay. He auditioned for the Watson role in that, and
but Cumberbatch beat him out, right?
Cumberbatch
beat him out.
They had already signed him. Well, see, he auditioned for Watson, but and the producer, after seeing his interview, said, "Wow, this guy would have actually been a really good Sherlock Holmes." But we've already signed Benedict Cumberbatch, so it was close. Yeah.
It seems like everybody's playing Sherlock Holmes. Henry Cavill plays him in the Enola Holmes. that's supposedly his sister.
Okay.
And Enola Holmes, it's on Netflix now. It's the second one, and Sherlock is in it, played by Henry Cavill.
Now, for the longest time, I have a confession to make. I thought that Ray Fiennes had a brother named Ralph Fiennes because it's spelled.
He does have a brother.
He does.
Yeah, but he does have. We looked it up. He does have a brother, right?
Yes, but
it's pronounced Rafe. It's pronounced Rafe, I think.
Well,
I looked it up.
I guess I thought it was just Ray. Maybe it is Rafe.
I looked it up. They show you in a pronunciation thing that it says Rafe.
Oh, okay. So it's just the fact that his last name is Fiennes that kind of disguises that F.
Yeah,
so for the longest
complicates
time,
it too. That
I thought Ralph and Ray Fiennes were two different guys. So I was mistaken about that. But yeah. So
what complicates it though is that he does have a brother that is an actor.
Right.
Yeah.
He was in I first saw him in a movie called Quiz Show. Don't know if you've seen that. I highly recommend it. It's an amazing movie.
I first saw him playing the Nazi in Schindler's List.
I guess that's when I first saw him too. I didn't remember him as much.
And since then, he's been typecast as bad guys all the way up through Voldemort with Harry Potter.
He plays Voldemort?
Yep.
Oh, okay. And he replaced Judi Dench as M in the Craig Bond films. Pretty capably, I would say. I mean, you can't replace you can't replace Judi Dench. But yeah. Now then, here's another confusion I had. This guy Rhys Ifans, I had him confused with Peter Stormare for a long, long, long time. I think it doesn't actually make sense because I think Peter Stormare is much older now. But seriously, I looked at some side by side pictures, especially of like him in Fargo, of Stormare in Fargo, compared to the reporter that he plays in this movie. I mean, they look.
What's the name again? What's his name again?
Peter Stormare or Rhys Ifans?
Yeah, well, the guy who plays the very loud and rude reporter who
That's
goes to
right.
Washington.
That's right.
All right, so he again, like the other guy from Game of Thrones, he plays King Viserys Targaryen in the House of Dragons.
So two
now.
two guys from this movie are in House of Dragons.
Right.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right.
Cool.
And they're both Targaryens. They're brothers.
Oh.
They play brothers.
Oh, excellent. I will tell you this character that he plays, the reporter, is kind of a small part in this movie, but very good. This guy is exactly who I would have been if my high school guidance counselor had described the job of journalist to me when I was in high school. I would have said yes.
Because you could get away with screaming at the boss and swearing at him and storming out.
Yeah, I want to travel the world and tell truth to power and bitch at my editor. And get all my meals receipts paid for.
That editor was a piece of work, wasn't he?
He's good. The newsroom scenes are my favorite from the movie. We'll get to those. Park bench check. Do we pass or not? Do we have a scene where two spies sit at a park bench discussing secrets?
Didn't you say something else stood in for the park bench?
That's right. Well, this is the one you brought up. We are officially now, if we have two people meeting in a parking garage, we consider that a pass. We have one of those.
It's considered a conspiracy.
Oh yeah. We also
two
have
people together.
We also have a bench scene in an indoor tennis court, which I would give partial credit to the park bench for that, even though there's no one around to see what they're talking about.
She works for GHHQ, and she comes across it on her computer, and she's disturbed by it because it looks like it is a memo trying to get information on the part of the UN Security Council to get dirt on them, to bribe them into supporting the war in Iraq. And she's disturbed by that.
Heavens, Fred, that doesn't sound very ethical.
No. And and then she goes from there, and she has this crisis of conscience about what she should do, where she should go, thoughts of treason, but also thoughts of British and American lives going to war for an illegal reason.
Sure.
And we find out more about that a little bit later.
I'm going to get into some specifics about the memo.
Okay.
Yes, it's a request from the NSA, from a guy named, I just said his name a minute ago, and now I can't even remember it. Frank Koza.
Frank Koza.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a request from the NSA to the GH, I think I got the acronym wrong. Oh my goodness.
GCHQ.
Thank you. The GCHQ. They're looking for any and all compromising information on some certain non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, which I'll start saying UNSC. The UNSC, it's 15 seats, 5 of them are permanent. That's the US, France, Britain, Russia, and China. And then they have 10 non-permanent seats, which get voted in for selections of 2-year terms. And I noticed that like all the countries that are being targeted by this operation, they're pretty small countries. Not to be rude to the people of those countries, I'm sure they're beautiful. But it feels like the big dogs don't really want any other big dogs on the council. You know.
Well, they don't have veto. The big dogs have veto
Uh,
power, which is one of the reasons why the UN has no teeth.
yeah. Unfortunately.
You know, like we can't do anything because Russian will sanction it. You know, and or vice versa. You know, if we mess around in Central
Sure.
America and the UN tries to, you know, hold us responsible for that back in the 80s, we'll veto that. So
And as we're going
yeah.
to see, you know, in this movie and from the historical events, the Bush administration was just trying to use the UNSC to get a veneer of respectability or
Mhm.
authenticity on his planned invasion. But
Yeah.
when he didn't get it, he just figured out how to justify it by other means. So,
When we look at history, um, countries that first search for a pretext for war, like the bombing of the Maine in the Spanish American War,
okay.
and the Gulf
Remember
of
the
Tonkin,
name.
yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin
Hmm.
resolution, where
Hmm.
our boats were supposedly fired upon. And that was very murky, a bunch of murky evidence, but LBJ used that to escalate. So, and we see here too, when a country wants to go to war, they'll first look for a pretext, and but as we see from here, nothing's going to stop them
Yeah, I think once it's
when
decided,
they want to go.
it's pretty much decided. Um, Now she uses a zip drive, a little bit of antiquated technology that actually didn't stick around that long, if I remember right, to move the memo from her computer to the print room, print out a copy, and sneak out with it. Um, I talked about this in the torture report as well. I don't believe the document security in these places is this lax. Um, my understanding is like there's very tight controls. Like they have records of who's even not even just who has access to stuff, but who's even read it, who's even allowed to know it exists, kind of stuff. But I have been thinking about it in both cases, and I've got a new theory. I want you to consider three things. Both now, these are just assume for a second that I'm right, and the document security handling that we see in these movies is totally bullshit, right?
Mhm.
I thought of three things that might make a good reason why it should be that way. Number one, if they showed us how Daniel or Catherine actually snuck the documents out, they might be implicating those whistleblowers legally, you know? Like there might be a little hand wavy stuff, something to protect those people. Because maybe they did do something that was, technically very, very illegal to get the documents out. Um, Number two, if they showed us how the documents actually got snuck out, well, you're also like you're threatening national security there. You're printing a handbook on how spies could sneak documents out of these places. And third, since both of these movies seem to be so pro whistleblower and pro, this kind of thing, they might not be showing how the documents were actually snuck out so that they're not tipping the security agencies off on how to prevent whistleblowing in the future. So those are my ideas of why it would be I don't think, I just in my heart, I think the document security is much tighter in these buildings, but I also see a bunch of reasons why it shouldn't be accurately portrayed in a film. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. Although I pointed out that Daniel Ellsberg made copies and smuggled them out
Uh-huh.
of the Pentagon Papers,
Yes.
constant copies.
Yes. And I did like, he gets asked, or no, you're talking about Ellsberg. I was thinking about our guy
Yeah.
from the report. Um, okay, so uh, is leaking this memo an act of treason? Fred, your thoughts?
Um, depends on what the government was doing, right? They said earlier that with the Falklands War, when Maggie Thatcher lied about sinking that Argentinian ship, and the whistleblower came forward and said she lied, she was embarrassed and wasn't going to have that again. So she made sure that the Official Secrets Act was amended so that what they figured was the public good or the public right to know would be whatever the government said it would be,
Right.
which included, as Catherine finds out, no legal defense, because the way they word it is the person charged can't speak with anybody about what they leaked, even to a lawyer.
That's
So
lame.
that is the situation she's in.
Right.
Um,
Right. Our guy Ray Fiennes
which
is
is
going to have to get really clever to get her off the
they
hook.
really wring their hands over that to the point where they think because it's so ironclad, they think she should plead guilty. But she points out if she does, not only would her life would be personally screwed up for future jobs and credit, but the precedent set where the government could get away with just about anything without any kind of a check. So those two motivations, and actually Ray Fiennes, Ben, gets the idea from her when she says about the defense was saving lives, that she wanted to save lives.
Let's go into more detail on that later. I want to kind of follow along the timeline of the movie. I think is a good way to go with
Yeah,
this one. But she gets it out. She passes it to a friend of hers who's an anti-war activist. And I like the scene there where, she's kind of teasing her friend for, information kind of thing. And she says, well, is it anything that GCHQ would be looking askance at? And her friend immediately, like the shields go up. She says, give me your phone. Like, what the hell? Because now she's on edge. Like, is my friend here to like bust me or something or try to entrap me? And I like that scene, but Catherine already took the battery out of her phone and was smart enough to make the call from a pay phone. So plus 5 points on her. Of course, you can't do that anymore because we don't have pay phones anymore. So whistleblowers got to figure something else out. But it does then go to another person and then to Martin Bright, who's a reporter at I know it's the Observer. Maybe that's just the name of the Observer. It's not the National Observer. Like that.
That was the second one they go to, because the first one, he said, didn't believe it. And ironically, the Observer was a conservative newspaper that had already made its position clear that it was pro-war.
Is Tony Blair a conservative? I guess he is.
No, he wasn't considered. I think he was part of the Liberal Party, but he went right along with Bush. I think he wasn't a Tory. He was maybe Labor, I want to say. Labor Party.
I remember a lot of jokes being made at the time about just how much Tony Blair was kissing Bush's ass and just doing anything he wanted. I'll reserve judgment myself. So now it's in the hands of our intrepid reporter. Well, what do you do with it first? I mean, first you got to find out if it's real, obvious first thing is like call this Frank Koza on the phone, ask him if he wrote this memo. But he can't get Frank Koza on the phone. They're just saying, sorry, do you have an extension? Blah, blah, blah. Can't help you. Blah, blah, blah. It turns out to be quite a bit of work to finally get someone at the NSA to answer to the name Frank Koza. But that person hangs up the phone immediately when the journalist, that's our Reese Ifan's character, identifies himself and what his interest is in the memo. Again, we do not even today know who Frank Koza is, which is weird. Here, let's have you do this next part. What does he do? What does he think of next to try to authenticate the memo?
Well, I start out by saying the thing that really surprises me about this whole thing is how when he starts his investigation, even after Koza, how many government officials open up to him, not only give him a wink and a nod, but but some of them tell him to keep digging. That's what really jumped out at me. Really, in spite of that very strict Official Secrets Act, virtually every official he went to gave him some information to encourage him. Just about all of them.
The MI6 lady was pretty pointed about it. We're going to get to her.
Yeah. But he first went to this Paul Beaver, who was the international security consultant, who authenticates the spy terminology, which I know is your wheelhouse, Todd. That TOPI, which means target of primary interest, and QRC, which is surge effort, and the whole idea of product lines, which means intelligence source, which the woman at the tennis game questions.
Yeah, she used
the product lines.
They use the term like, the WMD information is not our product. It's coming from somewhere,
right.
Meaning it's coming from somewhere else, not from us.
Right.
So
he goes to him first, and then the tennis club friend, the gal we're talking about.
Hold on, because I got another little bit of alphabet soup thing to mention. The QRC surge. I Googled that one. That stands for Quick Response Capability, referring, at least in one source, says referring to stepping out of routine management rules to get equipment or deploy personnel. Interestingly enough, when I Google I tried different ways too. QRC surge, quick response capability, U.S. intelligence, NSA, all sorts of stuff. I can't find a single reference on the internet to QRC surge that is not referring directly to this memo. So I could not find out if this is an actual thing that we do, if it's a sidestep kind of policy or whatever. There's no information about it. This is the only time it's ever come up is in this memo, officially. So it might be something we're not even supposed to know about.
Okay. Because I was wondering if you meant just it was a creation of the movie or something real that just happens to be in the movie.
No, it was in the memo, but it's never been mentioned, to my knowledge. It's never been mentioned publicly except in this memo. It's possible we are not even supposed to know that QRC surges exist. Yeah. And that might have been part of why they were mad about the memo getting leaked.
Sure. Maybe they put the gag on it after that came out.
But it's weird because they put it right there in the memo to the GCHQ people. So presumably GCHQ staff is supposed to know what a QRC surge is.
Right, but they're supposed to keep their mouths shut.
Yeah, Official Secrets Act. Right. So yeah, you were. I interrupted you. Thanks for letting me get that out. You wanted to talk about Martin's?
I didn't know how far you want to go. But,
sure. Yeah. Did you have more on that?
There was then after Peter's tennis club friend, there was Ed's retired CIA source, and I thought I really liked this Rear Admiral Nick Wilkinson. Because he didn't come right out and say it, but he used what I used in my teaching methods, which is the Socratic method in teaching. He didn't come right out.
I'm going to pause you a second. I want to tell the audience who this guy is. Who is he?
All right. He was Defense, Press and Broadcasting Advisory Committee who could order a D notice against publication of the memo about he could shut him down supposedly with this D notice. Now you did a little further research on the D notice. Okay. I noticed.
I'll come back to my thoughts. But yeah, this is a guy whose job it is to let the press know, like, hey, we need you to not talk about that. It's hush hush.
Right.
It would threaten national security. That's his job. Advisory.
Right. And right up front, who's the reporter? Martin,
right.
Says, I know that you could do this. And he said, yes, I could. But I think it's interesting how he handles it because, as I say, he uses the Socratic method on Martin in an ingenious way by, rather than implicating himself, throughout the discussion, he says things like, "What do you think?" Or, "I think you might be overthinking, as usual, Martin." Or, "You tell me." Right? Then he goes on to be pretty specific, and he goes on to tell Martin that he thinks all information collected in the name of the public should be made public. The only question is when. And then says that censorship, when called for, it should be based on security issues alone, not whether a news report might embarrass the government, which is more in the line of the woman who resigned from Goldsmith's office, who we'll get to. So I thought there's a wink and a nod, but I loved the way that this Nick Wilkinson handled Martin's question, because, like I say, he uses the Socratic method to draw him out by saying things like, "What do you think? I think you might be overthinking, right? You tell me." So he uses that Socratic method to kind of draw Martin out, and again encourage him, like so many of these other government folks do.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting.
Now I'm gonna go in and pry around the edges of this scene a bit myself. I like this scene, and I think the movie makers like the scene, and I think it might be fudging with the facts a little bit, because it so happens when I looked up a D notice, which is like, so a D notice, it's what Martin is saying, like, are you going to issue one of these against us if I publish this story? A D notice is supposed to be like, yeah, hey, don't fucking publish that. It so happens that Admiral Wilkinson, this very character, wrote the definitive book on the subject. It's called Secrecy in the Media: The Official History of the United Kingdom's D notice system. He literally wrote a book just about this. Now, D notices, again, they originate in the run-up to World War I at the time, and for a long time, they were just considered very sensible, very pragmatic, and nobody really regarded them as an infringement on press freedom. Editors just thought, like, well, hey, if the brass is telling us this is a secret, then we're not going to publish it. That's fine. It was just considered patriotic. The first time they became controversial was in 1967 in something that became known as the D Notice Affair, where the Prime Minister convened a tribunal to decide whether a newspaper called the Daily Express had violated the D Notice agreement. What happened, though, that tribunal ruled that D Notices compliance is entirely voluntary, and they don't have any legal status. So also I want to note that most of the officials, notice that Rear Admiral Wilkinson here is obviously, he's very pro-press. He's pro-free speech. So, and this is typical of the people they nominate to this office. They don't tend to nominate the people that would tend to like issue a D notice against everything. They tend to give it to people that are pretty liberal in their thoughts about like what should be made public, as we can see Wilkinson is. So what I'm trying to say is that D notices are not as scary as they're made out to be in this movie. Martin Bright would know that. And this scene, I think, is a little contrived for the purposes of the movie so that we can let Admiral Wilkinson make his points to the audience, which I think are good points. It's a good scene in the movie. I just don't think it actually would go down this way.
Well,
based on
you could look at it that way, but also I think you could say, and this is kind of what I thought, especially after I read what you dug up, is that Martin was being extremely deferential to him. And I'm sure, knowing what you all just said, that it was not binding, but just his way of being courteous and getting him to come out a little bit more, that kind of thing.
Right. But you're right, because the movie doesn't come outright and say, if we get a D notice, we're fucked. But I think the movie is getting to like have its cake and eat it too, in a way that it kind of wants us to feel that way. And that's how it usually D notices. I looked in the wiki. I have a list of like every time they've shown up in any movie. They've shown up in like Mission Impossible movies and stuff like that. And I think it's sexy. It's more sexy for the audience to think of him as this big bad sledgehammer of government control, but they're really kind of paper tigers. So that was Wilkinson. Tell us about the tennis club friend. This is Martin's his editor has a
She's actually, yeah,
he says
she's actually a M16 contact. Go
but
ahead.
of course when he says, can you talk to your MI6 contact, Peter says, I don't have an MI6 contact. Martin says, oh, I'm sorry, I meant your tennis club friend.
Yeah.
Which was
Were we
cool.
meant to think that they were lovers?
Ooh, that's a possibility. I don't think
It almost seemed like there was a little too much familiarity there
maybe they
for
went
them not to be, but
maybe they went to college together. I don't know.
yeah. So he's the M16 contact. Her name is Jacqueline, who tells Peter that the evidence of the mobile labs, Colin Powell's, may be based on poor human intel from an Iraqi dissident who is not our product, which means intelligence source.
Turned out to be the case, right?
Yep, and shouldn't be seen as our product. There is concern in certain quarters that intelligence may be manipulated to take this country to war. So tell your journalists to stop being so bloody loyal to Downing Street and start doing their job. However, when Peter asks her to confirm whether the NSA instructed GCHQ to assist in spying on Security Council delegates, which is what the memo said, she said that if she answered it, it would put her in breach of the Official Secrets Act.
Oh, no.
To which he said, very wisely, to deny it would not, to which she says she can neither confirm nor deny, which is the proverbial wink and a nod, another wink and a nod I think he gets.
Right. So confirming it would be a violation. Denying it would not be a violation. So she's perfectly free to deny it. And simply by not denying it, what's she saying? She's confirming it. Plus 5 points.
Yeah. One of in a long list of government officials that are giving him more than a wink and a nod to proceed, that was one of the biggest things that jumped out at me in this movie.
Sure. And there's another source that they're going after. That's in the U.S.
Ed's retired CIA, this grizzled old CIA guy.
Ex-CIA, as the editor of the paper keeps making a point of.
Yeah, the intelligence about Iraq is sketchy at best and manufactured at worst. And the whole infamous CIA director, Tenet, who keeps saying that the intelligence was a slam dunk, which was bogus. We know that.
God.
And he pretty much says that, but no one wants to hear it, not even the press. And then when Martin asks us about Frank Kozas, he said he can't go that far and confirm that. But he still, again, tells him a hell of a lot, I think.
Yeah. So they have the, let's see, I worked in software publishing, and I was a quality assurance manager for most of my career. And what they have at the paper is what we would call a go, no-go meeting, where they gather up, they haven't been able to get as much as they would like to authenticate the memo, but they all sit down and just powwow hard on okay, what are the facts that we've got in this?
Yeah.
Of course, our super excitable Reese Ifans, the Ed character, is on speakerphone because he's their Washington correspondent. That's why he has a CIA source. And he's on the phone saying, yes, damn it, I got him on the phone. He said his name was Frank Koza. So here's what they know. So they know that Koza exists. They've established with an independent consultant that the language used in the memo is very authentic sounding. What's this? Like you said, they've checked with Wilkinson, and he's, as you said, kind of given Martin the nudge to go ahead. The MI6 lady was very pointed about it.
Yeah.
Do your job and quit just printing out the press releases from Downing Street. Yeah. And Let's see. Although they realize going ahead with the story may jeopardize the friendly relationship they have with the Blair government, Martin says, since when did we prioritize political access over investigative reporting? Yeah. So,
Yeah, because the one flunky says, "Hey, come on, we've already taken a position on supporting the war."
Mhm.
You know, like that should be written in stone.
I enjoyed hearing that voice in the room. I really enjoyed the fact that the editor in chief was so like fuck this at the beginning,
Yeah.
but is legitimately won over the arguments. Overall, all the scenes in the press room are my favorite parts of the movie. I really dug them. It makes me want to go see let's see, what's that movie? The Robert Redford movie on the Watergate affair.
All the President's Men.
I've still never seen it. This movie made me really want to watch it because I like
Well, since
this
we're
kind of stuff.
since we're on the press, and let's just say why they went ahead. I made a list of why they went ahead. So I said the reluctant conservative and previously pro-war Observer newspaper, after dogged investigative journalism by Martin and others, decides to go ahead with the story for the following reasons, other than the fact that it's a hell of a story, right?
Yeah.
So, number one, because they go through this in the editor room, they know that Koza sent a memo, right? They know that that exists. Beaver says the language is authentic. Wilkinson says while the publication may embarrass both governments, he doesn't believe it poses a security risk to the British people or the armed forces. The associate editor Peter says that the publication might prevent a war and save lives, which would later, as we know, would be Catherine's defense. And the M16 source would neither confirm nor deny, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have, and then in the end, the grizzled old editor says, "Yes, we do support the war, but Peter's right. This is a good fucking story,"
Yeah.
which I guess trumps everything. Yeah.
Now,
Let's see.
something I think we've neglected to mention so far, which I want to point out right now, is like why they're being so careful. Like, what's the counter case? What are they afraid of about the memo? Well, they're afraid the memo is faked. And there's a few reasons the memo might be faked. After all, they did get it from a known, apparently a very high profile anti-war activist. So the anti-war movement.
Well, that's, yeah, they poo-pooed it. That's why they poo-pooed it at first, once they heard that.
Right.
But then the more evidence started coming in.
Somebody also comes up with the less plausible idea, but still worth considering, that it's a foreign intelligence agency that's trying to embarrass both the United States and the British government at the same time. Right. Yeah. So hurrah, the memo does get published. So again, obviously, though, there's a lot of people out there that would be eager to find reasons to discredit the memo. And the Drudge Report website, which I've never heard really good things about myself.
No.
But they, to their credit, as far as doing a good job of what they're trying to do based on their beliefs, is that they noticed something really messed up about the memo, which is that it uses British spelling for certain words. I forget which words they were exactly, but you know how color is a 6-letter word in
O-U-R, yeah.
British, right.
O-U-R, yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah, they give a couple examples.
2 or 3 things like that. And what happened there was that a young staffer at the Observer, who was given, I don't know, she was somewhere in the chain of printing the memo.
Yep.
She used spell check on the memo, and it changed all the American spellings of words into British spellings of words.
All right.
I think it's good work on the Drudge Report to notice that. I am really, obviously, apparently it really happened. It's not minus spy points, but it's definitely minus newspaper points for something this important to have that obvious of a mistake slip through. Like, that's the sort of thing where the editor in chief should have been personally managing every step of the process, all the way from
Right.
word
And
processor
yet,
to print.
as much as that's true, it was still an honest mistake.
That's true.
But should have been caught. Right. You're right.
Yeah.
Should have been caught. The other thing, too, about embarrassing that should be brought up, I think,
Sure.
most of these so-called security threats, from the Pentagon Papers to this, right, to Watergate, most of the time when administration, to the Falklands, as we saw, most of the time when administrations cry national security to muzzle a story, it's usually not. It's usually embarrassing information, like the Pentagon Papers showed, like this showed. Most of the time, national security isn't at risk, other than maybe some of the things that Snowden leaked, because some of those things could have been shown to leak intelligence sources that could have been at risk. But so many of the others were just plain embarrassment.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to keep that in mind too.
Well, shame is apparently one of the most powerfully primordial motivating factors in human behavior. People will go so far out of their way to avoid embarrassment.
Even risking lives.
Yes.
Even to risk lives.
It's very powerful.
Like the Pentagon Papers did, and this did. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the sad part, that there really isn't national security issues. It's just that every government claims that. And then they have to go through court and the Supreme Court, and Ellsberg had to be on the run, and then the Supreme Court had to make the decision. And until they found it, when they looked at the Pentagon Papers, they saw that there was no national security risk. It was just embarrassing information.
I got to be honest. When I was watching this movie, I really I appreciate that this movie did this for me, in that, I didn't think myself that the memo was that big of a deal. And I had to go through all the steps of the movie, walking me through all these characters and their reasoning and their arguments and their passions and ideals to understand that this kind of thing really is that big of a deal. I kind of, without the benefit of this movie, if you'd told me about this memo, I would have just kind of shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, I'm sure that shit goes on all the time." This movie did a good job of convincing me that this is total bullshit. You're not supposed to spy.
And that there's
you're not
nuance.
supposed to spy on your allies, and you're definitely not to spy on your allies in order to prosecute and get validation for an illegal fucking war.
Right, but some people don't do nuance well, and there were those, as we saw, who couldn't get past the fact that she violated the Official Secrets Act. That's all they cared about.
Sure.
Whether it was that guy from Scotland Yard or that woman at the immigration authorities, right? Or I'm sure a lot of British people themselves, all they saw was she violated, and they don't care or don't understand the nuance that she was trying. And she explained that very well to that Scotland Yard guy.
She does.
That I was representing the British people, not the British government. And like I said to you before,
yeah, she says governments change. I'm not employed by the government. I'm employed by the people. That's who I answer.
But here's the big difference, and I said this in my notes, between Britain and the United States. Even though we get our Constitution based on British common law, ours is written on paper. Thomas Jefferson was one of the holdouts with the rest of the anti-federalists, because they were so gun-shy of a strong central government, which they knew they needed to get anything done, because with the Articles of Confederation, they couldn't tax, they couldn't form an army or anything like that. So with reservations, the anti-federalist says, okay, we're going to go along with the stronger central government, but we want individual rights printed down. Oh, well, they're there. Well, no, they're there, but we want them printed out more specifically. So they called for a Bill of Rights, right? Mm-hmm. To spell out individual rights of press and freedom and religion, right? We have that. We have the luxury of that. The British don't, ironically.
Can you remind me?
The British don't have a written constitution.
Can you remind me? I don't think I've ever been super clear on when exactly the Bill of Rights was drafted.
It was just I don't exactly. It was after, obviously, while the Constitution was
but
going
was it
on.
a couple years after or a couple decades after?
I'm not sure. We could look it up. But
Okay.
the main point is they were holding out, right? The Anti-Federalists, Jefferson and company were holding out until we're not going to sign on to this Constitution unless you spell out the rights. And a lot of people argue, and you could say that the Constitution itself had those rights in, but he wanted them more specific. And I'm glad he did.
And now you're saying,
because that protects us.
Now contrast it for me with, because I don't know how it is in Britain. Britain doesn't have a foundational document.
They don't have a written constitution. So
everything
they get away with
based on precedent. Is that what we mean when we say British common law?
And they argue those ideas, but they don't have the due process like we do, right? They argue those ideas and they win, just like Katherine came out here, right? It's not like they don't have any due process, but they're not as specific as ours are. And I remember in the 80s, the way the Thatcher government rounded up Irish Republican and the IRA soldiers and threw them in jail, detainees without lawyers, shoot to kill orders. So many rights that were denied them. And they were always banning books. BBC was always banning music that you didn't see over here. So that's one of the big differences between the freedoms they have and the freedoms we have.
So let's talk about let's talk about this little difference of opinion that we have on how she gets treated. To set that up, let's run through real quick. The memo gets published. They launch an internal investigation at the GCHQ. She gets freaked out. She says, I'm making life hell for my coworkers. She comes forward and confesses, and they interrogate her and they let her go. They say, we'll let you know in a few months whether or not we're going to charge you. Now, this is pursuant to everything that you've been talking about, right? I looked at that and I thought about what I think we would have done with Edward Snowden if we'd gotten a hold of him. What's the name of that? Is it an army chick, a trans woman that's in prison right now? Do you know her name? I forget it.
I forgot. Chelsea?
Something? Yes. Chelsea Manning, I think it is.
Yeah. There you go.
And really all of the whistleblowers where it came down to intelligence type stuff, I thought the US was a lot more slammed down. I didn't imagine.
If you could, the difference was if you can prove that security was breached and that there was a national security, like with Snowden, I guess they could prove that there were security breaches there and that people in the field were at risk. But Daniel Ellsberg fought that fight as far as freedom of the press is going, right?
But did he? I have a question for you. Did he fight that fight from inside the bars or outside the bars? Did they let him? Did they say like in this case? Did they
he was on the run. It went to court, right?
Okay.
It went to court, and let me see here.
But they didn't just let him walk out freely and say okay, well, I don't know.
Well, he was on the run. He was on the run and was in hiding all the time. But the right of the press to publish the Pentagon Papers was upheld in the Supreme Court case, New York Times versus U.S. It has since been referred to as one of the pillars of First Amendment rights with respect to freedom of the press. It is a major difference between official secrets and the Pentagon Papers is that the British, and I just got done explaining that, does not have a written constitution that spells out and guarantees rights like speech and press, along with due process that goes along with it. And like I said, he was on the run and it went to court and he was scared, but he won because, and the New York Times won.
Right. Right, but that's
Be-
what that's
and they
what I'm
saw that there
saying.
was no when the judge looked at the Pentagon Papers, it saw that there was no national security threat there. It was just embarrassment.
That's what I'm saying. She didn't have to go on the run. They just let her walk out. I know what you're saying about like definitely what the US government should do and like what our rights are as citizens and stuff compared to Britain, but I still honestly feel in my gut
We couldn't
if
have gotten away. You know how Maggie Thatcher amended the Official Secrets Act? We couldn't have done that with our Constitution and Bill of Rights.
that's true.
That's the
That's
difference.
true. I get that. I just think that I still in my gut I feel like if Katherine Gunn had been an American citizen that did what she did, our government would have found a reason to keep her.
They would have lost in court
Yes, but they wouldn't have.
because
Okay,
they thought they found a reason with Ellsberg too, but they lost.
once this is out in the public, like the
Oh,
people that are the countries that are cited in this memo are pissed off. They call it an outrage. It's a massive uproar, and they refuse to vote. They don't vote up or down on the war. They just say like you fuck you. We're not voting for this. So without the vote, the Bush administration now resorts to the faulty intelligence supporting the WMD theory. It was a little unclear to me the timeline of whether or not this article came out before or after Colin Powell made his totally fucked up speech. But yeah, so like we talked about at the top of the episode, you know, you're going to go to war, you're going to go to war. You can't find this reason to do it, you'll find another. And that's what happened. Um, there was the internal investigation. We kind of covered that. We kind of jumped ahead and did a bit of that. We talked about special branch, and we talked about what her response is to the special branch guy. I work for the people, not the government. So yeah, I think we're ready to go to the section that we have titled Liberty and Government Pressure on Catherine.
she tells her husband that she has to admit to the leak because if the Americans are refusing to admit the memo was real, and if she doesn't tell the truth, they'll get away with saying it was a fake. And they're questioning everybody at work, interrogating my friends, asking people to name names, and there'll be a question mark in hundreds of people's files because of me. Um, Everyone at work knows what the NSA asked us to do was illegal. If I don't say it was me, we'll go to war based on blackmail and lies, and I can't live with that. This part she later sees is naive, right? The very fact that what she decides to do and when she does it, like the whole war would be dependent on her. And she realizes later that that was naive. If she, with all her hand wringing about not only releasing the memo, but owning up to it, could ever have a chance of stopping a war that the powers that be were going to go ahead with anyway. All right. So she realizes that she's not going to have much to do with that, although that was part of her thinking in a small way before the war actually started, I think she thought. And I think a lot of it was the principle thing about the lie. And before the war actually happened, I think in her own naive mind, I think she still thought that maybe the release of the memo would do more than embarrass, but possibly stop the war.
Yeah,
But later on, like I
that's
said,
what she wanted. Yeah, she didn't do this just to embarrass the government.
no, 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 no. And she
She
really,
certainly didn't do it to improve her husband's chances of getting naturalized as a British citizen.
yeah, well, I don't think she realized they'd play dirty with that whole thing to either
Mm-hmm.
until they did, right?
Yeah.
Um, the Scotland Yard guy, a couple times, he says you're supposed to be a spy, and now you can't really pick and choose who you want to spy on just because you don't like the whole idea of spying on the Security Council. And she comes back and says, I don't object to collecting intelligence to help prevent a terror attack, but I object to gather intelligence to help fix a vote at the UN and to deceive the world into going to war. And then they bring up the whole thing about her husband being a Muslim, and she points out that her husband has no love for Saddam by the way that he's killing the Kurds, which he is one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes back and says, so if you don't like Saddam so much, why would you leak a memo intending to help remove Saddam? She says that by attacking, and see, this is where nuance again, which some people don't seem to have, that you're not just attacking Saddam, you attack the whole country of over 30 million people. And I cannot bear to think of the pain and suffering that will cause. And that's another thing where that pesky nuance coming up again, right? That she's thinking through that the world isn't black and white, good and bad. Saddam has to go and everything will be fine. She's thinking about the whole repercussions in the fog of war and all the innocent lives that will be taken, Iraqi, British, American, Canadian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, right, we see in the credits just how many Iraqis are killed in that unnecessary war. I think 151,000 to over 1 million. And like I say, those are those pesky nuances that people just don't want to consider.
Right.
And so she's told about, like you say, from that one public defender, she's told about Ben Emerson and the Liberty lawyers who try to pump her up and tell her that she's doing a good thing.
Now,
By leaking information to try.
who are the Liberty lawyers? Let's set that up. They're
They're
mm-hmm.
they're a bunch of civil liberty lawyers who help people in this kind of case. We have those in this country, most likely known for working on death row prisoners. They work out of, I want to say they started out of the University of Chicago.
Right. Also civil rights cases, freedom of speech kind of stuff. I forget there's
and of
an
course
organization we have in the US. Their name escapes me right now.
civil liberties.
That's
Civil liberties, ACLU.
Yeah, that's them. So these are
Right.
those kind of people.
Right.
They'll take
Right.
they'll take her case not because they're getting paid for it. They're going to take her case because they're principled.
Yeah, and I would think there'd be even more of a need for them, considering how, like I said before, they don't have a Bill of Rights that spells out First Amendment rights like we have. So there'd be more, and they were at a loss and didn't know how to pursue this because of how ironclad that law was, so that you couldn't even
The scene
contact a lawyer.
The scene where they first meet is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and is some of the best acting from what's her name? Again, podcast brain, or maybe it's the beer. What's her name? Keira Knightley.
Yeah,
I really like, because Ben's got to, and this is our Ray Fiennes character. Ben's got to do his due diligence and peel away the layers. Like he says, particularly the question where he says, a lot of people that approach us are, to be frank, attention seekers. Is that you? She gets very defensive over that. And he's like, no. We just have to be sure. Don't be afraid. What I see that you chose loyalty over your country, over loyalty to your government. You have nothing to gain and everything to lose by doing this. I think that speaks very highly of you. So the process by which he assures himself that she's legit and assures her that that's their stance was good for me.
Yeah.
But as you have a lot of in your notes, they've got they're in a sticky wicket because of
that whole Falkland things. Yeah, the Falkland thing wrapped up the whole whistleblower appeal that Maggie Thatcher amended.
And I'll put the little color on that too. That was in the 80s. I guess it was during the like you say, the Falklands War, which was Britain versus Argentina, right?
They were fighting over an island, and off the coast of Argentina.
And that
Yeah,
was in the
and
80s.
Britain, the British.
And the
I
whistleblower
think
in
so.
that case was a guy named Clive Ponting.
I
And
think it was a sailor.
oh, really? Okay. Well, somehow he had
Not
access
sure.
to Ministry of Defense documents with which he shared not with a foreign intelligence agency, but just with another agency in, like, basically a member of parliament is who he shared it with. And that was the first time the Official Secrets Act, which goes back to 1911, was when it was first written, was used as a charge for interdepartmental sharing of intel. Now, he got off, like we said, he was acquitted. And as you've said, immediately after that, it was amended so that essentially the public interest is whatever the government says it is. And he couldn't use, so she can't use the public interest defense. Oh no, Fred, what is she going to do? She's fucked.
Well, I think Ben uses her own words when she says, I wanted to save lives. And he said, that's it. And the one gal says, you mean you're going to put the whole war on trial? And he says, yes. And then they jumped on to the saving lives aspect and the questionable change of mind of Lord Goldsmith.
So yeah, so that's right. We were to now the defense he's landing on is the saving lives. Now, to make this case, you can't say that you're saving lives in a legal war. So, like, it has to be proven to be an illegal war.
That's what I was. Yeah,
And
that's what I was going to say.
yeah,
That's the other thing that's different, I think, between us and the British. Obviously, they hang a lot on the UN itself, right? We've always thumbed our nose at the UN and made fun of it and looked down on it and so on. Where obviously the British respect it more, otherwise, because that's what the whole illegality was hanging on, right? The UN sanction, where we've never let that bother us when we've ordered.
why would we?
Well, right. What's the point
Sorry.
of what's the point of signing on to a international peace organization if you're not going to go by it? But the British's credit is they obviously were hanging the whole legality on it with the UN sanctions, right? And then when it was found what they did, hence the illegality. For example, when we mined the harbor in Nicaragua and it was found that we were supporting a war through not the Defense Department, but through the CIA with the Contras in Nicaragua, that was against international law to attack a sovereign nation, but we did it through the CIA with Reagan. But we just yawned and thumbed our nose at it. Where obviously the British are hanging a lot on this whole UN permission thing, which is another big difference, I think, between us and the Brits. You know?
Sure. So I want to pry apart this defense a little bit because it's kind of the last, like the climax of the movie, so to speak. Goldsmith that we've mentioned a couple times, he's kind of like the attorney general, or he's like I don't know, the legal advisor to the government, and he's a guy that says the war. Oh, and by the way, we should mention too that at this point the war has broken out. Like at this point in our story, it's too late to stop the war. The war definitely happened. Now it's just a matter of what Catherine's fallout is going to be. So they're looking at this, and this guy Goldsmith. I'm looking at your notes here. He said the war was legal just 3 days before the invasion. They want to know what his position was at the time Catherine leaked the memo, because if he changed his mind, right. So I think
His
help me out
deputy,
here. if you're saying like, okay,
His
yeah.
deputy, right?
So if
Go
you're
ahead.
saying like
Go ahead.
British government, they're hoping just as much as Bush does that the UNSC will approve the war. And then this memo put a wrench in that. So I think the point this movie's trying to say is if they can prove that Goldsmith changed his
Right.
mind after the memo was leaked, then that proves that they were under pressure from the Bush
Right.
administration.
Yeah.
Right? Have I got
Yeah.
that right?
And we go
Okay.
down to his deputy. She resigned because she said in her letter of resignation,
And
go ahead.
her name is Elizabeth
Right.
Wilmshurst. Yes, former deputy legal advisor to the Foreign Office to Lord
I,
Goldsmith. She resigned apparently over
yeah.
this.
She said that it would not be lawful to use force without a new Security Council resolution. She said that Goldsmith, who was tasked to decide whether the war was legal or not for Blair, initially supported her view. In fact, he told Blair that if military action were taken, he expected the government to be accused of acting unlawfully. She said that it was a detailed advisory document because that's when they asked her if it was written. She said it was a detailed advisory document and would have been his position at the time Katherine Gunn printed the Kozo memo on February 3rd. And then I said, spoiler alert, this written document of Goldsmith's position on the illegality of the war will be the smoking gun defense of Catherine's that they won't have to use because the government withdraws the charges because they know they can't rebut them. And then Goldsmith goes to Washington for what I call a come to Jesus or Don Corleone, make him an offer he can't refuse moment, my words, where he changes his tune. And according to Wilmhurst, in 9 short paragraphs, he said that the UN's authorization for the 1991 Gulf War could be reactivated to legitimize a new war with Iraq. And then what this reminded me of, the rationalization sounds suspiciously like John Hughes' hair-splitting redefinition of torture by the same administration who scrambled to redefine and manipulate precedent to get their way. How convenient, as Church Lady would say. Goldsmith told Blair what he wanted to hear, and Wilmhurst says, at best, he was persuaded to support a really fringe point of view. So, Todd, I couldn't help but be reminded of John Yoo and how he had to scramble to come up with a redefinition of torture. In the same way, they take this bogus authorization of the 1991 Gulf War, which was different, and say, okay, since the UN authorized that, they should be able to authorize this. That's really a reach. And it reminded me of
I
the John
agree,
Yoo.
and I want to reiterate my point about the John Hughes situation that I think was so important in Zero Dark 30 and the torture report is that the National Legal Council, their first priority is to protect the
Yeah.
administration. That's lawyerly thinking. Protect your client. And so their arguments are always going to be so ironclad in order to protect the administration that the unintended fallout of that is that the administration is then perceived as so uh, on solid ethical legal ground that everyone underneath them, all the underlings, all the middle staffers, like it would be unpatriotic to not use all the powers available to you.
Mm.
That's the bind that this kind of bullshit like puts our hard-serving, hard-working, I believe, ground level intelligence and defense personnel at such
Yeah,
risk.
but the CIA has been bitten by that dog before. And they know they'll be caught, they'll left, even if, like we said before, if Reagan and Bush are given plausible deniability by not knowing, right? They'll be left
All right,
hand in the bag and
that
have
too.
been. The CIA it'll be their heads. And that's why they're very reluctant because they've been bitten by that dog before.
All right, so now Wilmshurst doesn't actually testify at Catherine's trial. In fact, nobody does. like you said, like when they, so they're pushing. I mean, they're pushing. They're doing a brinksmanship thing here. They're saying like, "Hey, give us the documents, and if you don't give us the documents, then that means you're hiding something." Right? And when it, so they go all the way up to the brink in the trial, and she still always has this option, and her sentence is going to be pretty light. I forget exactly what it was. I think it was like 9 months or
Yeah, I kept
something.
waiting for them. I kept waiting for them to bring in the librarian that met with Smiley.
Which librarian was that?
From the
Oh,
spy who came in from the
from
cold. You said they didn't bring in anybody, right? I kept waiting for Smiley to bring in the
right.
librarian.
Yeah. But they push it and push it, and again, I just want to underline, like, her sentence wasn't gonna be that harsh. It wasn't like she was looking at like 20
You mean
years or
if
something.
she
It was like
pled guilty? Right.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That'll be our defense. They said, and we'll just plead for leniency. But then she said
Which I think is even more to her credit,
yeah,
that this very easy way out is offered to her, but she's like, no, fuck you. We're gonna tell the
right.
truth. I love
Yeah.
her. So it goes to trial. She sticks with the not guilty plea, and the big, I don't know, guess surprise of the movie, it's definitely surprising to the judge or the magistrate, I don't know what they call him in England, is that the government is dropping all
Yep.
charges. Just dropping, like, we're not going to present any evidence. We're not going to call any witnesses. We're just going to take her at her
And
word, which
right. And
is
yeah. And Ben, on the one hand, somebody might say, okay, let's just shut up and get out of here. But Ben doesn't want to let him get off the hook so easily. And that's what he ends up saying to the friend on the beach. In other words, you put this woman through such hell. We demand to know. You have the right to tell us what was the deal,
oh right,
and which I thought was good.
right,
Um,
yeah,
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 you
yeah.
put this woman through, and so it's not enough to say, okay, goodbye, you've got your freedom. No, you can't walk away like that. Not so fast.
And yet they
Right.
do, and they just clam up, and that's the again. It's sort of like the way the our MI6 agent at the tennis court could confirm or
Yeah.
deny, but the fact that she does neither tells you
Yep.
everything you need to
Right.
know. And the fact that the government is refusing to confirm or deny uh, uh, the validation of their charges against
Mm-hmm.
Catherine tells us
Yeah, it
everything
does.
we need to
What
know.
about this one thing that was just dropped that Ed stumbled on? This OSB, the Office of Special Plans, about this cabal in America that he comes upon.
This is the Reese Ifans character, or Peter. You said Peter.
No, Ed.
That's
Ed, the guy with the leather
Ed.
jacket.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he said, Bush wasn't getting the intelligence he wanted, so Rumsfeld bypassed the CIA and set up his own intelligence unit. It's like, what? They had they fed raw, unvetted intelligence to Bush and Powell, who led us into war. That's like a whole other movie right there, and that was just kind of dropped on us. But that was the pressure that lawyers who represented those guys put the full court press on Goldsmith when he came to Washington, which got him to change his mind.
That's the lingering question to me still is like, what the fuck is a QRC surge, and who the hell is this, like, Peter Koch, Fred Koch, what's his name? Anyways, who's that guy, and what the hell is a QRC surge? We still don't know. We still don't know. Fellow Spy Nerds, at the risk of boring you, I've got an editorial note that I feel like I need to make. Several times during this podcast, I referred to the QRC surge as something that was very, very difficult to find any information about online. Since recording, we did find that this policy is published on the Department of Defense's website. The link will be in the show notes. If you're watching the video, you can see it on screen right now. I just wanted to say I apologize for maybe making it sound more spooky or inscrutable than it actually is. It's very important to me that we, strive for accuracy on this show. Sorry about that.
I did like, too, that all the help she got, even that her MP was pretty cool. How he...
You mentioned that, too. I saw that in the notes. What do you mean her MP?
Her member of parliament. You know,
MP?
like how we have Congress people? She has a member of parliament. In other words, her representative, her local representative.
Oh, okay.
Right? And that's when, that's the first thing when they were starting to deport her husband. They said, get a hold of your local MP. They got it, the number. And he's on the phone with that immigration person who starts to say, you're deporting this, or, questioning her patriotism. And he says, I think deporting her husband when she's facing a trial looks like bullying, which gets her to back off.
Yeah, we kind of glossed over that subplot in the movie because it wasn't a lot of tradecraft involved in it. But those were good scenes.
Yeah, but he was the last and maybe the most minor government official, okay, that helped her, right? And that's the thing that jumped out at me. I think I list 6 of them. And like I said, he may have been the most minor, but still, there were 6 government officials that helped her and her lawyers and the journalists pursue this case, which I thought was surprising and kind of nice.
Agents, please report for debriefing on this operation. The director will see you now.
Fred, I already know that you liked the movie. How much did you like the movie? Give it a 1 to 5 and tell us why.
I liked a 5. And again, I like movies that are truthful. And it really, when I looked it up, everything I read about it says that it's an accurate account of an actual event that dealt with exposing the truth, and that the film remains faithful to telling that truth, especially when considered the lives the event intended to save, even though it failed in that regard. Often a film of this nature will sacrifice truth for drama, but in this case, in my opinion, it had both, right? It had great drama and an accurate portrayal of the dark politics that occurred in both Britain and the United States in search of a pretext for war. So like The Report, I loved it as a morality play. And I don't care if it's a bunch of people in a room talking. Really.
We've established that.
To me, what they're talking about is riveting and important. And the very fact that the drama was good, but it didn't seem to sacrifice what really happened, too. So I give it a 5. I love morality plays that are accurate and authentic and well done, regardless of the so-called entertainment car chase factor.
Sure. Well, Fred, once again, I'm a little on the other side of the fence as far as my personal entertainment value that I pull from this movie. It's pretty low. I definitely I'm happy I saw the movie. I'm happy I learned about this stuff. I'm happy we did this podcast. Am I rushing out to put this DVD on my shelf? No, I'm not. I wouldn't even really say I need to watch it again. Although I gotta say, once again, the newsroom stuff was so fucking cool that I'm bumping it up. This, obviously, for me, this is going to be very similar to The Torture Report. I do think this was a slightly more enjoyable movie. And the newsroom stuff was the major reason for it. I'm just going to bump it up a half a point, and I'm going to be at a 2.5. And that's just us. We're not professional movie critics. We're really here to talk about the tradecraft, but it is fun to just at least tell people what we thought of the movie. Yep. I like car chases.
Yeah,
I like
so do I.
fiction.
So do I. They have their place.
Yeah. Okay, so the real important stuff. We're going to get into our worst tradecraft of the film. I see you were a good
Yeah,
boy this
I stuck to
time. You
3.
didn't give me 5. You stuck to
Yeah,
3.
yeah.
All right. My worst tradecraft of this film, number 3, number 2, number 1. Number 3, D notices from my research don't have nearly as much bite as the film tries to imply. I think that scene was somewhat manufactured in order to let the filmmakers make their points through the character of Admiral Wilkinson. Number 2, I think document security at Catherine's office would actually, in reality, be a lot tighter than what we've seen. I already talked about my reasons why I think that might be intentional to kind of gloss over in a film. My number 1 worst is, now I'm not sure if they were being honest about this or just being dicks on purpose, but this fucking idea that Catherine might be motivated by her husband's situation, like it's ludicrous, and I love it as my number 1 because it highlights this, like, what you call lack of nuance, and I just think sometimes it's just ham-headedness of thinking that like all Iraqis are the same, of not understanding
Right.
the intersectional differences between
Hmm.
Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds, etc. But the idea that her connection to her husband would be a motivation for her leaking, either they're incredibly stupid or they're just being assholes. Number 1 worst tradecraft. What do you got for worst?
Um, I put the full court pressure that the attorneys for Bush, Powell, Rumsfeld, and Rice put on Lord Goldsmith when he went to D.C. that got him to change his mind about the legality of going to war. That in Ed's words, he said, fucking caved to them when his country needed him the most. Number 2, Observer journalist Ed tells of the Office of Special Plans where Rumsfeld bypassed the CIA to set up his own intelligence unit that fed raw, unvetted intelligence to Bush and Powell, who lied us into war.
That's a good one.
And the worst one is the whole dirty deed that the memo revealed of the National Security's attempt to spy on the communication of UN Security Council members to blackmail them into supporting the war. So the whole memo is my worst tradecraft.
All right, real quick, Fred. And this is fine with me either way, but it seems like your top 3 are or your worst list is the intelligence actions that you object to the most, as opposed to being like the intelligence actions that you think were ineffective or unrealistic.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think you could say that right down to me, because I really, when we get into these, right down to me giving
Mm-hmm.
the movie a 5 stars, because
Yeah.
I cannot separate the morality from the deeds. I can't. I just can't. So you're right.
That's
You're right. I just can't,
and that's
especially when they're truthful.
That's okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine with me. And I remember when I first recruited you to ask you to be the new co-host of this podcast, you specifically
I warned
said,
you.
like, there's just one thing. Yep, you want to be able to fucking speak your mind and
Yeah, I
your
can't.
get on your
Well,
soapbox. And I said,
yeah.
fine. So all I'm doing, I'm not asking you to change a thing. I just thought it would be I thought this is a great time to make sure we and the audience, we understand, like, you and I might be coming at it from
Yeah.
slightly different
Yeah, I
perspectives.
cannot.
Which is
Right.
cool.
I cannot separate, especially something like this that actually happened and cost lives. I can't separate the morality from the deed. But I've even said that in some of them. Some of the ones that I've put down for worst tradecraft, I've usually said, although someone might think that's good tradecraft because it worked, right?
Right. I think in our last episode, you thought killing the librarian was one of your worst. I thought it was one of the best.
Right. And that's an example of how I can't separate the morality from the deed. But you're right to
That's
yeah.
fine, dude. Hey, you do you. We're doing great work here. Let's go over to
Okay.
best. Um, Best number three. It's a slight one. There's not a huge amount of tradecraft in this film. It's more a whistleblower film than a it's more a legalese film than a true spy film. Number three best. I really just enjoyed the way that Catherine's anti-war contact like immediately froze up and threw her defenses up and said, "Give me your phone," as soon as she mentioned
Mhm.
GCHQ. That was cool. Number two best, I like this a lot, was using that contractor to authenticate the spy lingo in the memo. That was
Yeah,
fun
you didn't.
stuff.
They were a step
Uh,
ahead. Those Air Force contractors you didn't like in the last one.
right, right. And easily my number one best. It's MI6. It's that whole thing of like, well, I can't if I confirm your suspicions, I'm in violation of the Official Secrets Act. Well, if you deny it, you're not in violation.
Hmm.
So are you going to deny it? And she's like, mm. That was
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
What do you got for best?
Well, just the whole Emerson's decision once they saw what they were up against with the Official Secrets Act that allowed no defense is to place Catherine's entire defense on the legality of the war. Once they got wind of the probability that Lord Goldsmith was changed his mind from the time of Catherine's leak, and how the pressure he got from Washington. So they go ahead with the request of full disclosure from the government of all legal advice given by Goldsmith in the year leading up to the invasion, which would contain the smoking gun evidence of him in fact changing his mind. So that whole defense of going on with the legality of the war. And I remember at one point, the one lawyer said, "You realize if they ever find weapons of mass destruction, this whole defense will be shot because there would have been a reason to go to war, and you couldn't
That
use the
was
lives."
that was a risk they were
Right,
taking. That was a risk they were
right,
taking for
right.
sure.
Number two,
Mm.
just a dogged old-fashioned investigative journalism to confirm and validate the story from legitimate and highly respected government officials, right on through. That's what really stood out to me. That um, most of the government officials that Martin and some of the others pursued gave them more than a wink and a nod to go ahead. Some said just keep digging. And my best was, even though we never meet him, Frank Koza's sending that memo to GCHQ that starts the whole ball rolling.
Now, I saw that in your notes, and I want to interrogate you a little bit about that. Why do you consider that good tradecraft?
Because we wouldn't, none of this would have happened without it.
Okay, so you're giving it a number one for being realistic. You
And
think
moral.
because
Yeah. And
obviously,
again, going back,
it
yeah,
happened.
he was the whistleblower. He really was the whistleblower, even though we never meet him or they never meet him either. But he started the whole ball rolling. The whole, yeah, just that whole memo sent to them. Yeah.
Okay, I have funny thoughts on that one, but I'll let it slide. What are we gonna do for a park bench rating here? Um, I think I managed to remember. I mean, we should definitely compare it very closely to the
Yeah.
report. Um, what did I'm looking right now? What we gave the report? Uh, let me sort this A to Z. Um, hmm. uh, okay, we landed on a 3.5, so above the fold, you know, but not too far above. Mainly because there was so little tradecraft in the movie. Not because it was unrealistic. We thought both of these movies very realistic. How much of it is there? I think I think our opening bid should just be another 3.5. I think they're very comparable.
All right.
Any uh
Okay. Go
any
ahead.
thoughts there?
Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, that's a 3.5 park benches. Thank you, audience, for hanging out with us. Fred, there's another thing I need to start asking you to do, which is to ask. I don't know if you know this, but we have a computer assistant named Mora that manages our operations here in the secure facility that we do our operations in. And at the end of an episode, I like to ask my co-host to do the final thing of asking Mora to invoke Protocol 9.
Okay, ready? All right, Mora, please invoke Protocol 9.
Protocol 9 initiated. This podcast will self-destruct in 20 seconds. The preceding transmission sampled the songs Ice Cold by Audionautics, Enter the Party by Kevin MacLeod, and sound effects from freesound.org. Attributions and links are found at spieslikeus.net. Editing by Todd Hostetler.